So you've just stumbled upon BookTube or BookTok and you have no idea what's going on. Whether you've been a reader your whole life and you just hadn't found this community, or you're new to reading and you're just looking for your footing, this is the place for you. Welcome to my channel. In this channel we talk everything books, so if that's your vibe, make sure to subscribe and stick around. Okay, so you're feeling overwhelmed. I promise you this is the only video you'll need to dive straight into your next 5-star fantasy read. You'll leave this video knowing exactly what book is best for you and which book you want to try first. So I've got my notes, I've got my matcha, which is also a recurring theme in this channel. So get comfy because we're jumping right in. Okay, so before we jump into all the books, I think it's important to mention the most common fantasy tropes. Just thought it would be cool to mention them in the beginning so you can like kinda, I guess, pick them out and notice them as I talk about the books. So first and foremost, we have enemies to lovers. I feel like this is everyone's favorite. This is definitely my favorite. Like, I eat enemies to lovers books up every single time. And this one is very self-explanatory. You just have two characters who start off as rivals and they end up becoming lovers and falling in love with each other. We also have found family. This is also one of my favorite tropes. This trope, you'll usually have like a group of outcasts and they just form like an unbreakable bond. Yeah, this trope highlights like the family you choose instead of the family you were like born into. We also have a very popular one, which is the chosen one. And in this one, you'll have like the main character who is like uniquely chosen to like fulfill some type of like destiny or prophecy. You'll also see a lot of morally gray characters. So it's characters that don't necessarily fit like super neatly into the hero or villain category. Fantasy does something to all of us, and I found myself supporting some very morally gray characters. We also encounter in fantasy a lot of fae and like political, I guess, intrigue. So the fae are like a very common creature in a lot of fantasies. When fantasy books have fae in them, it will for some reason come like really intertwined with the politics of that specific world and universe. When a fantasy book has very heavy romance inside of it, we'll call it a romantasy. So if you ever hear the word romantasy, just know that it's basically a fantasy book with a very heavy romance subplot in it. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more tropes, but those are the ones that I constantly see. So I thought it would be very important to mention them before jumping into the books. So here's how I thought I would like section this video out. First, I'm gonna jump into YA fantasies. So this will be books with less mature themes and definitely either very little or no spice at all. And then we'll jump into more mature themes and popular books, contemporary, classical, and all that jazz. Without further ado, let's jump straight into our first category: beginner friendly / YA fantasy reads. What type of fantasy video would this be if I didn't start with Harry Potter? If you don't know about Harry Potter, you've probably been living under a rock. But either way, I thought I would mention it because it's such a well-loved and beautiful world, and it's such a cool fantasy story. I really love that it's beginner friendly and it's also YA. So in Harry Potter, you'll see the trope of the chosen one very strongly. In this series, you follow, of course, Harry Potter as the main character as he discovers that he is a wizard, and he not only is a wizard, but he is also the only wizard to ever have survived the Dark Lord. This series has 7 books and 8 film adaptations, and then the same author published a bunch of other stories in that same world. So if you fall in love with the universe, you can just keep reading all the other stories inside this same universe. This is one of my all-time favorite books to recommend to non-readers or to people who are just getting into fantasy, and that's Powerless by Lauren Roberts. Powerless is a YA fantasy, and you'll see the trope of rivals to lovers very heavy in this series. I wouldn't say enemies to lovers because the main characters don't actually like despise each other or hate each other. They just kind of have like different roles in society, so they're kind of rivals in that way. In this world that Lauren Roberts has built, there are ordinaries and there are elites. Elites are basically people with powers and ordinaries are people with no powers. But this world's leaders and just the kingdom in general has like brainwashed everyone into thinking that ordinaries take away from elites' powers. So basically they're like cleansing all the ordinaries. Kai, one of our main characters, he is the king's son and he is the king's enforcer, which means he basically does his dirty deeds and kills all ordinaries. Our other main character is Peyton. She is of course an ordinary. So these two characters find themselves really intertwined when Pei gets thrown into trials that she has to compete in and survive. Trials are always super fun in the fantasy genre, by the way, and you'll see those a lot too. And of course they fall for each other and they have to kind of navigate through those feelings while having to actually be rivals. This series currently has 3 books out. We have Powerless, which came out first. We have Powerful, which is the novella after Powerless. Powerful actually follows 2 different characters, which I won't go into that much, but you can look into it if you're interested. And then you have Reckless, which is the second book in the trilogy. This series is going to be a trilogy, and the last book comes out this year, which I'm so excited about. Yeah, I think this series is perfect for a first-time fantasy reader. It's so easy to get into. The writing is very simple, very easy to follow. There's not that much world building. Sometimes in fantasy books, it can be a little hard to get connected to the story because there's so much going on and so much that you have to learn about the world that it kind of gets a little overwhelming. And I don't think that happens with this series, which makes it very perfect for you if you're a first-time fantasy reader. Okay, next we have a very beloved series, which is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I will say, and I forgot to say this at the beginning, I'm just here to share what's popular right now in the book community and to briefly tell you what the books are about, and you can see if that's your vibe. And I'm trying to be as objective as possible, so what I think about the books isn't really relevant in this video. So Once Upon a Broken Heart is very heavy on the enemies to lovers trope. You follow Evangeline and the Prince of Hearts, Jax. Evangeline bargains with Jax because she wants to stop the love of her life from marrying someone else, but then she quickly realizes that that bargain comes with a price. This series is everyone's favorite, like everyone is obsessed with this series. It's a trilogy. I read the first book and it just wasn't for me, but don't let me discourage you because literally everyone is obsessed with this series, so it might be for you. Stephanie Garber also has another series. The first book is called Caraval. Caraval is also a fantasy YA series, so definitely check that one out if you end up picking this one up and you like it. Actually, I believe you're supposed to read Caraval first and then Once Upon a Broken Heart, so definitely look into Stephanie Garber if her books sound interesting to you at all. Another really good YA fantasy that I haven't personally read but everyone absolutely adores, like literally in every single video I post I get comments about this series, is Percy Jackson. I've seen a couple of movies, but I know that the world is so big. So Percy Jackson follows Percy Jackson. He is a 12-year-old boy who finds out that he is a demigod. So he is like Poseidon's son. And then he is taken to a camp called Half-Blood Camp where he's supposed to like train with other demigods. Like I said, I haven't read this series, but it sounds super fun, so definitely check that one out too if you're interested in YA fantasies. And the last series I'll be talking about in this category is The Cruel Prince. This book is by Holly Black and she has also created like this entire universe, although I believe The Cruel Prince is originally a trilogy. It's also very heavy on the enemies to lovers, and this book is also a favorite among the book community for sure. I haven't read this one, but I do have it in my radar and my TBR because of all the great things I've heard. Okay, so we're still in YA, but now we're moving into like a more mature YA, like with a more serious tone. The next series I'll be talking about is a big commitment because it's a very long series. I'm sure you've guessed it by now, but I'm of course talking about the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. So Sarah J Maas is one of the most, if not the most popular fantasy author right now in the book community. I'll talk more about her a little later, but right now let's focus on her first series, Throne of Glass. So like I said, Throne of Glass is still a YA fantasy series, but it does have more of a serious tone to it. You'll see a lot of like the fae and political intrigue trope inside the series. We have a very strong female character, and I always love strong female characters for sure. So in this book you follow Selena. She is actually come to be known as the best assassin in the kingdom, and she gets summoned to the castle basically to compete in some trials against other criminals. If she wins her freedom. So that's kind of like what's going on in the first book, but this series is so long and so detailed and so deep and layered that it ends up being something completely different than you originally thought with the first book. I kind of like to compare it to Harry Potter in the sense that it's a big commitment, but it's so rewarding because you get to know the characters so much, and the characters have such a character development. Sarah J Maas is also a great author. I love her writing. The way that she talks about minor details that actually end up being so important and that you actually don't see them tie into the story up until the very last book in the series is just like mind-blowing to me how she does that. So if you're looking for more of like a very rewarding commitment and kind of more of like a slow burn with world building and just a very layered story, this one's for you. It's technically a 7-book series, but then Sarah J Maas released a novella that is chronologically supposed to be a prequel. So chronologically it happens before the entirety of the series. It's this book right here, The Assassin's Blade. There's a lot of talk around Assassin's Blade because you can either read it as the first book in the series or as the third book in the series. I personally read it as the third book in the series, and I'll give you my arguments as to why. So The Assassin's Blade is basically a book of short stories following Selena, like I said, in a different timeline as the actual series. So you're just following her in a bunch of adventures. To me, I feel like the short stories aren't engaging enough for someone who doesn't know and love the character already. That's why I always recommend reading the first 2 books in the Throne of Glass series first. When you already know and love Selena, then you're kind of interested to see how she got there and what happened before she got to this timeline. So I just don't think this book is like engaging enough as a standalone. If you do choose to read it first, just keep in mind that the series just gets better and better with every single book. So if you don't feel as connected to the characters in this book, it's completely normal, and don't give up on the series. And wait, because there's actually one more thing I have to mention about this series. These 2 books, Empire of Storm and Tower of Dawn, chronologically these 2 books happen at the same exact time. You're just following different characters' points of views in different points of the map. So it's literally the same timeline, but it's different locations, characters, and events that are happening. There is a tandem read order online. So if you look up Throne of Glass tandem read order, it'll give you a document with a detailed guideline on how to read these books as a tandem. So you'll like pick one up and then switch in between the books. That's how I read them, and I personally absolutely recommend it like that. It's just a super fun way to read. Like, I had never done a tandem read and I found it super fun and entertaining, so I definitely recommend. Okay, let me put these away. Also, I do have to say Kingdom of Ash is my favorite book in the series. It's a very long book, but it's so worth it, and it definitely doesn't disappoint as the grand finale in the series. That was a lot. I feel like I can't have a fantasy reading guide without mentioning the following series, because they're like the classical series in the fantasy genre, which I'm pretty sure you've heard about. I do want to say I haven't read these, but listen, I promise to break down everything fantasy, and that's what you're getting, even if I haven't read everything in this video, okay? Of course, we have The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I feel like I also had to mention Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. I don't know if I butchered his name, by the way. I do plan on reading these series eventually because I do appreciate a good world building and good writing, which I'm sure these are famous for a reason. They're just not in my immediate TBR for now. Okay, with that, we finally got into popular contemporary fantasy. And I just want to briefly mention some very notable authors that are really popular among fantasy fans and just like the fantasy genre in general. Heather Fawcett is one of them. I'm sure you've heard of her book, The Encyclopedia of Fairies. I haven't read that book, but I did want to mention it so you have it top of mind and you can look into it and see if that's something that you would be interested in. We also have Brandon Sanderson, and I've heard so much about this author's writing. Among some of like his most famous books, we have the Mistborn trilogy. We also have the Stormlight Archive, which I believe is a longer series. Okay, now for actual authors and contemporary fantasies that I've actually read. You already know. Okay, you remember when I talked about that long series, Throne of Glass, and I told you Sarah J Maas was very well loved, and I told you more on her later? Well, the time has come. So now that we've gotten to a more popular contemporary series that are definitely not YA, I think this is the time to talk about Sarah J Maas as an author and talk more about her series. Sarah J Maas has 3 series out right now. The first one is the Throne of Glass series, which this blows my mind, but I think she actually started writing that series when she was like 17 years old. But I feel like her most popular series, or I guess it goes back and forth between Throne of Glass and this one, is the ACOTAR series, which you'll hear everyone refer to it as the ACOTAR series, but ACOTAR actually stands for A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is the name of the first book in the series. And this series isn't complete. It's still in the works. We'll still have more books to come. So in the ACOTAR universe, there's Fae and there's humans. Again, heavy on the Fae and political intrigue for this series. The information that is spread around the human side of the world is that Fae are very dangerous and that they'll just kill any human on sight. In the first book, you follow our main character, Feyre. Her family is going through it basically financially, and her dad is very depressed, doesn't work, so she has taken it upon herself to bring food to the table. So she has to go out and hunt for food. One winter, she finds herself in the woods and she sees this very big animal and she kills it for food. She then basically finds out that that wolf is very closely intertwined with a fae, and she has to pay some retribution for killing it, and you just basically follow her story from there. So a couple of things about the ACOTAR series. If you're new to fantasy, I wouldn't necessarily start with this series because there is a little more world building. Another thing to know about the ACOTAR series is if you read the first book and you find it underwhelming and you don't know what the hype is about, trust me, the second book is the book you'll find out what the hype is about. I felt the exact same way, and actually the first book in the series is my least favorite of all. Sarah J Maas's third series is the Crescent City series. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. There's Fae in that series too, but they're like living among us in the modern world. I just like don't think I'll be reaching for the Crescent City series anytime soon. Okay, bear with me because we're almost done. The next and final author I want to talk about in this category is Rebeca Yarros. If you recently stumbled upon BookTube or BookTok, you've probably seen so much about this series because the third book in the series just recently came out like 2 months ago, and that is the Empyrean series, Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, and Onyx Storm. If you get anything out of this video, please let it be to please read Throne of Glass and to please read Fourth Wing. This is one of the most, if not the most famous BookTok book. I feel like it's very heavy on the enemies to lovers, and I must say, out of all the fantasy book boyfriends, Riz from ACOTAR and Satan from Fourth Wing are my 2 favorites. Basically, from a very early age, kids and teens in this world start preparing for like the career path they want to take. There's like more high stakes like career paths that you can take, and there's more like low stakes career paths. For example, a low stake career path can be being a scribe, which you're basically recording history, studying, reading, and writing. The most high stakes career path in this world is to be a dragon rider. So our main character, Violet, has trained all her life to become a scribe, and then very unexpectedly she gets thrown into the writer's quadrant, which is like the most dangerous career path, like I said. And in the first book you just follow her experience as she tries to train with like the rest of the writers and tries basically not to die. There's lots of dragons in this book, and the dynamics between the characters and the dragons is like the most unique thing I've ever seen among like fantasy characters and magical creatures. Of course, this is a romantasy. I'm honestly obsessed with this world. I feel like it's so immersive, it's so unique. While reading Onyx Storm, I had so much fun. I actually found myself laughing multiple times. Every single time I read a book in this series, I literally can't put it down to the point where it starts becoming detrimental and I'm like, I need to finish this book or else I can't move on with my life and do anything else besides read. Okay, the last category I want to briefly mention is historical fantasy. So I want to quickly mention some popular historical fantasies just in case you're interested. So basically, in case you don't know, historical fantasy will be a book that mixes in actual historical events from like real life with magic. This is a very popular one. It's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book is one of the most beautiful writings I've ever seen. Another really popular one is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Okay, last but not least, I want to mention some fantasy books that are on my TBR that I want to read and that I would keep top of mind if I were you too, because they're very well loved in the book community. So the first one is Divine Rivals, Dance of Thieves, The Cruel Prince, and lastly, I don't have the physical book, but Heartless Hunter is probably the one I'll read first because the second book in the duology is coming out super soon this year, so I do want to read that as soon as possible. That was so much. I hope before clicking on this video you were feeling like the bad type of overwhelmed and now you're feeling the good type of overwhelmed. I know I threw a lot of information at you. Hopefully it was in a very digestible and organized manner to the point where you could just take notes and go on Goodreads and add some books to your TBR that you thought you might be interested in. If one person did that, I accomplished my goal. So yeah guys, that's all for today's video. I had a lot of fun. It was a lot, but let me know if you want more reading guides like this one. Like I said, in this channel we talk everything books, from vlogs to sit down videos to book reviews. So if that's something that you're interested in, make sure to subscribe and stick around. If this video helped you at all, don't forget to like it. And if you want to keep up with me in between me posting videos, because life does get busy for me, I do have a 9 to 5. I'm very active on Instagram and TikTok. I also keep you updated on Fable and Goodreads. And yeah, I think we're officially done with today's video. I hope you enjoyed and I'll hopefully see you in my next video. Bye guys!